Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. This afternoon, we are in the fourth session of this seminar. From my observation and the comments I heard, I know that you've all been enjoying the topics presented and find them quite informative, as I have. We have discovered from the last few weeks, or few sessions, I should say, Dr. Barry Wecker was born in Saskatchewan, but loves to travel and spent a lot of his life doing so. Some of his experiences he has shared with us, especially when he visited some of the African cities. After obtaining his master's degree in public health, he developed a passion to help people in many countries around the world to stay healthy as much as possible without having to take medicine. He's still quite busy with a private practice in New Brunswick as well as with projects in DR Congo. Dr. Wecker, despite your busy schedule, we are very happy and appreciative that you have accepted our invitation to share your knowledge and experiences with us. Thank you. Today, Dr. Wecker's two-part presentation is focusing on depression and anxiety and the battle between love and fear. It's all yours, Dr. Wecker.
I have my own mic here, thanks. What she didn't tell you is that her sister and I worked together in Ivory Coast, Côte d'Ivoire, for several years. And her brother-in-law is just a real, well, both a sister and brother-in-law are real fine people. And we've had them at our home, and we've had some tremendous times of laughter and sharing humorous, comical stories of our lives in various and sundry places. It's just been a real blessing to know both of them, too. And when I went to Guyana, for the first and only time that I've been in Guyana, the three countries in the north of South America were ones that I had not visited, and I one day decided it was time to go see them. So I flew into Georgetown, and then I traveled across Suriname, which is an enigma in South America, okay? I don't know if you know about Suriname, but in Guyana we drive on the left. So I wasn't sure what was going to happen when I got to the border with Suriname, because Suriname was colonized by the Dutch. But sure enough, they also drove on the left. So here in South America, we have a country that drives on the left, that speaks Papiamento, that was colonized by the Dutch, and there were a whole bunch of other interesting things about Suriname as well. And then when I got to the border with French Guyana, the customs officer, as I was going in, said to me, well, how are you going to get, because I'd taken a bus across Suriname, how are you going to get into Cayenne, the capital of French Guyana? I said, I don't know, I'll have to hitchhike. He said, no, you won't, you'll come with me. So he took me on into Cayenne. Now, whether you know it or not, but French Guyana, it's still an overseas department of France. And it is where the European Space Center is. So all the space launchings for the European Space Center take place out of French Guyana. And the reason is it's almost on the equator, and the energy to launch a satellite into space from the equator is less than it is from Cape Canaveral in Florida. So on Christmas Day this past year, the European Space Agency, along with the Canadian Space Agency and NASA, launched the James Webb Telescope into space from French Guyana. And I don't know if you see any of the photographs that are coming back from that, but they are fantastic. They are actually going back to the various early days of our universe. And the information and the photography is just stunning and mind-boggling. We live in a phenomenal universe, and as I was driving down the road yesterday, I just thought about how small and minute we are here on this planet, and yet there's so much around us. So anyhow, that's just a little interesting travel story regarding that part of South America. Before I start this evening, I'll tell you a little bit about my projects in the DR Congo, and maybe on Saturday afternoon, if you will allow me, I may give you a little presentation about some of the work that I do there in the DR Congo. But right now, one of my major projects is working with the Pygmies, who are the indigenous people of Central Africa, the equatorial rainforest, and who have been terribly marginalized for centuries. They've been hunter-gatherers, they've been beaten, they've been killed. In fact, during the Congolese Civil War of the past 30 years, they were actually hunted and eaten by the Congolese army. So I've been working at trying to improve their lives, and we've had some remarkable successes, but it's quite the challenge. So maybe Saturday afternoon, before we start our 4 o'clock meeting, if any of you are interested, I'll show you a little bit about that work. Okay, tonight we're going to be talking about two very, very common disorders, depression and anxiety. And I'm sure that many of us, if not all of us, have experienced some of these symptoms at some point in time in our lives. And some of us may indeed have struggled with them quite severely as well. But before I launch into that, I've got a couple of funny ones to show you. A friend of mine once told me, and I'll see if I'm going to get this working here now. Let's see, do I need to turn something else on? Let's see. This should be working here. So it's not advancing. Okay, well, I'll advance it this way. It's better to eat a Kit Kat with friends than to eat broccoli all by yourself. So remember that we are meant to be people in relationship. We are meant to be connected. And one of the most difficult things in life, let's see if we can get that working there. Is it switch to turn it on maybe? Or oh, okay. Well, that helps. Yeah. So we are meant to be connected with people, and if we're not connected, it's a very traumatic experience. And that is why prisoners who are put in solitary confinement are destroyed by that, totally destroyed. The other one is one I told you about last night, and I found it. There it is. Protect your child's immune system. Let them play in the mud. Did you know that children who have pets and grow up on a farm are healthier than those who grow up in the city and are scrubbed on a regular basis? Our children need to be exposed to some of these things, and if they are, their immune systems grow stronger and healthier. Now, we're going to be having on Friday evening a talk about boosting your immune system, so I will save some of that information for Friday. So today, our talk is on depression. In Canada, 11% of men and 16% of women will have a major depression during the course of their lives. Those are pretty high numbers. Depression decreases the quality of life. It promotes relationship difficulties. One loses time at work or with their studies. It leads to and causes chronic disease such as diabetes and heart disease. And unfortunately, depression can occasionally be even a fatal disease. However, the good news is that in most cases, there are effective treatments for depression. And one of the first things that I always tell a patient who comes in complaining of depression is, don't lose hope. We can help you get better. So I think that is something that most people with depression need to hear. I've had patients with depression describe what it feels like, and they've come up with some very descriptive stories about what depression is like. One of my patients, who was also a very good personal friend, said it's like being in a dark, dark tunnel and you never see a light at the end. Another one said it's like being in dark clouds as if an impending storm is coming and you're waiting for the hurricane to launch and it just never quite seems to arrive, but it's always there. It's definitely a difficult disease to deal with. During the course of our lives, we all meet difficult times. The loss of a person who's close to us, difficulties in the workplace, and many people have a feeling of failure when things don't go as planned. These are normal reactions to the difficulties of life. These are not disease states. And with the two diseases or the two health conditions that we're going to discuss today, there is a difference between having a trait of these disorders and having a disease of these disorders. And the best way that I can describe it to you is, with depression, we have all felt down from time to time. But as long as we are able to function in our life and work through that down feeling, it's not a disease or an illness. One of the anxiety disorders that I tend to struggle with is claustrophobia. I never knew that until one day while I was caving, and I used to enjoy going caving. And this particular cave that we used to always explore with my friends, at the very end of the cave, there was a tunnel that you had to go through, and you had to slither through on your belly, just sort of like a worm to get through the tunnel to get out of the cave. And I never had a problem with it because I always went first. But one day I got stuck in the middle, and the person in front of me got stuck in the tunnel, and there was somebody behind me. And I started to panic. I felt like I was trapped. I couldn't breathe. I just about lost it. And I realized for the first time that I struggled with a bit of claustrophobia. Well, it's a trait. I can ride on elevators and, I can manage through. It doesn't disturb my life if I'm not caving most of the time. When I come into a building, I will sit on the end of the row. I won't sit in the middle unless there's no other option. If I get an airplane seat, it's always on the aisle. If I walk into a public bathroom and the handicap stall's available, well, that'll be the one that I will choose because it's got some more space. But my life's not totally disturbed by it. There are people who are disturbed by claustrophobia to the point that they can't ride in an elevator. They can't be in a room when the doors are closed. I had a patient call me up the other day and say, I need to see you, but I've got to be the last appointment of the day. There's got to be nobody else in the clinic except your staff. The door cannot be closed. There cannot... Boy, this lady had some significant issues. So there's a difference between a trait and a disease. So with the trait of depression, we can be down. If we take our sort of the middle as our normal mood, sometimes we're happy and we're above that normal level, sometimes we're below, and it tends to vary and oscillate, and that's fine, that's normal. But it's when the dips become very, very deep, or the mountains become very, very high, and they interfere with our capacity to function that it becomes a disease state. So what are some of the symptoms of depression? And depression basically involves the whole cortex, the whole cerebrum of the brain. And we have discovered at one point in time, although there's some question now about whether this is correct, that depression is caused by a disturbance in our neurotransmitters, the chemicals that transmit electrical messages in our brain from one nerve cell to another. And we discovered this when we used a medication for treating blood pressure 50 years ago called Catapress, and it caused people to become depressed. And we found out that it disturbed these neurotransmitters, and therefore, and the neurotransmitters are things like serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, GABA, aminobutyric acid. There's several of them. And so we focused on these, and most of the modern treatment for depression are serotonin reuptake inhibitors that increase the amount of serotonin in the brain. The last couple of months, there's been studies coming out putting this whole thing into question. So I'm not sure what direction things are going to go and where we're going to be with this disease, but I'm keeping my eyes open. Depression disturbs our thoughts. It disturbs our behavior. The first thing is a feeling of despair, hopelessness. There's a feeling of indifference about life. And frequently, there's an indifference about those who are the closest to us. Frequently, there's fatigue, and there's definitely sleep disturbance. Some people tend to want to sleep all the time. Others can't get to sleep, but sleep is disturbed. There's emotional fragility, a tendency to feel like crying all the time. A lack of ability to concentrate. A lack of ability to make decisions, thoughts that life is just not worth living and that the only solution one can see is to end one's life. There's a loss of appetite, headaches, frequently digestive disturbances. And so it's a combination, a constellation of these symptoms that lead us to make the diagnosis of depression. Since I've been in practice now in my community for 35 years, and I know my patients extremely well, it doesn't take me long to pick up on depression in some of my patients. The other day, a lady was in the office, and I walked in and I said, "How are you?" She said, "Fine." I said, "You didn't answer my question. How are you?" And she burst into tears. And she said, "How did you know?" I said, "I could tell by looking at you that things weren't going well." And so then she unloaded her burdens. But sometimes it is a little bit more difficult, and sometimes we have to actually put together this constellation of symptoms in order to really make the diagnosis. Now, so this is the cycle, okay, of depression, and it becomes a vicious cycle. It snowballs. So with depression, we have low energy and fatigue. Our coping skills are difficult. It reduces our coping skills to almost non-existent, and then we begin to feel guilty, hopeless, ineffective, and then that just spirals the depression. And we need to break that cycle somewhere in there in order to provide some relief for it. Conventional psychiatry, based on managing the symptoms of depression, and it's strongly influenced by pharmaceutical companies. So the first thing many physicians will do, you come in, and the moment they have any suspicion you're depressed, out comes the prescription pad, and they start to write. Right? But depression is a symptom more than it is a disease. And we have to find out what the underlying causes of this are. And then we work at trying to improve and correct these causative factors. There's a saying that if the only tool we have is a hammer, then everything we see looks like a nail. And so physicians frequently, if the only tool they have is medications, then every single patient who comes in is going to need a medication. And I think back to Sir William Osler, famous neurosurgeon in Montreal, and he said, or physician in Montreal, anyhow, at McGill, and he said, when I started the practice of medicine, I had 100 medications to treat every disease. And when I ended my practice of medicine, I had one medication to treat 100 diseases. And it shows that there's not always a specific medication for every disorder. So some of the things that we need to look at, and one thing that I put on here is there can occasionally be glandular and hormonal problems. So I always check people for a vitamin B level, for their thyroid functioning, to make sure that those are not contributing factors to their depression. So what do we do? What are the other things that we have to treat it with? Well, I think that one of the main things, as we talked about last night with the gut-brain connection, sometimes we need to be looking at eating habits. And when I quiz people with depressive illnesses, I find that most of the time their eating habits are horrible. They're not eating healthy food. They're filling their stomachs with calories, but not the nutrients that they need or that their brain needs to fix it. The other one is physical exercise. As one is depressed, one has no motivation to do exercise. All one wants to do is be locked in their environment, in their room, in their bedroom, in their bed. And it takes so much energy mentally to get out of bed or out of the door that they just can't even face it. So they just stay locked up and closed. A very good friend of mine who had a serious struggle with depression would go in the bedroom and lock the door, and he would stay in there in the bedroom for days at a time. Wouldn't allow his wife in. And so what I ultimately did was I managed to find a way to get into that bedroom. And I would barge in and say, listen, up out of bed, let's go. Let's go for a walk. You got to get out of here. You can't just stay in your cave because you will not get better with that. Mineral supplements. There are several minerals that are very, very important for brain health. I'm going to look at those in just a couple of minutes. So I frequently will get people with depression to start improving their diet, and then we give them some mineral supplementations as well. There is a type of depression which occurs every year at this time of the year. And last night, when I got back home, I met a young man who I have been communicating with online for many months now because of COVID and because I've not been able to get to Ottawa. He's a university student in Gatineau, and he is originally from Morocco, and he has been struggling with depressive illnesses. And so when he came over last night, we talked, and he said, well, I've done well this summer. I've really done well. I've worked hard. And now classes are starting, and now things are starting to slip again. And that's always a little bit of a warning sign to me that they're dealing with what we call seasonal affective disorder, okay? And here in Canada, you know the shifts that we have in light over the course of the year, from 20 hours of light in July and June to 5 hours in December. So for those who have lived in the tropics, doesn't happen. I remember when some of my collected kids arrived here, and they said, what do you mean it doesn't get dark at 6 o'clock? It always gets dark at 6 o'clock, and it always gets light at 6 o'clock. No, it doesn't here. And, I can't believe it. It's 10 o'clock. I can still go outside, you know? And I did go up to Inuvik a few years ago, and when I got up to Inuvik, in June, right after the spring or the summer solstice, I was walking through the streets of Inuvik, and I found a mosque. I thought, oh, my. Well, it happened to be Ramadan. So I tracked down the imam for the mosque there in Inuvik. I said, what do you do during Ramadan? I'm just interested. How do you fast from sundown to sunrise when the sun never goes down? He said, oh, that's easy. We just follow Mecca time. So whatever the time is in Mecca, that's what we follow. So the same thing goes for Adventist Christians who want to observe the Sabbath from sundown to sundown, Jewish people who observe the Sabbath from sundown to sundown. What do? Well, you pick a time and you just do it, whether it's 6 o'clock or 6, whatever. But it is very strange. As I was there in Inuvik, and I was walking down the street at 1 o'clock in the morning, and there were families walking with children, and they were all buying ice cream, and they were just having a good old time. I looked at them and said, when do you sleep? They said, when we get tired. Oh, okay. Medications. So we have light exposure. Now, with seasonal affective disorder, there is a light you could buy. And it's called a SAD light, seasonal affective disorder light. You can buy it from Amazon. You can buy it in various places. And you need to sit under that light for 30 to 40 minutes every day. And it gives a certain type of ultraviolet light that is necessary to keep your mood solidified. But you have to keep your eyes open. You can't sleep under it. The light has to be absorbed through your eyes. So if any of you are feeling wintertime depression that starts in the fall as the days are getting shorter, it might be something to consider with a seasonal affective light. There are medications that we can use, absolutely. I think it's important to communicate with friends and ask family for support. It's especially difficult if people don't have friends and family to give them the support with these symptoms. We need to have some increased time with significant people in one's life. The sad thing is that people in severe depression have pushed away every significant person in their life because of their disease, and they feel very, very alone. One other thing that is currently an issue, and that is with the legalization of cannabis in this country, we are getting a massive increase in mental health disorders related to cannabis use. The sooner one starts using cannabis, the younger one is, the more trouble we have. And so there where I live, we're very close to the state of Maine, and Maine has an advertising campaign that says it may be legal, but that doesn't mean it's safe. And I think that's a very good idea. Cannabis is a mind-altering drug, and since the legalization of cannabis, the concentration of THC in the products that are available for sale in the cannabis stores has increased significantly. It's up to 10 times as much as it was before. And the THC is a very, very mind-changing, depression and schizophrenia-causing substance. Most cases of schizophrenia that I see in young people today are cannabis-related. So avoiding cannabis and detoxing from it. So psychotropic drugs are the medication which have had the most rapid increase in the number of prescriptions in Canada today. Over the last 20 years, there's been an increase of 500% in the prescriptions of mind-altering medications given to children. It's astounding. We need to remember that the body has a capacity to heal itself if we will give it the ingredients it needs and if we allow it to heal itself. So, in order to find out what the cause of depression is, we look to see whether there is any nutritional imbalances. And my next slide here looks at some possible nutritional items. I'll just go through my list here and then we'll come back to it. So we look for nutritional imbalance. We look for unusual stress factors. What's going on in your life? What has taken place in your life? We look for hormonal imbalance, thyroid gland. I've noticed that depression is especially common in times of hormonal change. So in women, I see depression occurring at 3 times in their life. I see it when they start having their menstrual cycles. As teenagers, I see it when they have children born, when there is terrible hormonal change during childbirth, and I see it at menopause. So hormonal imbalances play a role with depression. And many times, if there is a hormonal imbalance with women at those 3 times, I can help treat it by just stabilizing their hormones rather than giving medications and doing other things. If there are medications that cause depression, we need to stop them. If people are using cannabis, we try to help them get off of cannabis, not an easy task. And one of the other things that plays a big role with depression is screen time. And there is a clinic that I am aware of that when a child comes in with depressive symptoms, and I'm seeing many children coming in with depression, I'm getting parents bringing their children in, and one of the first things that we do is you get a 2-week screen-free time. No screen time at all. Television, computers, iPads, telephones, 0. And it's amazing to see the change that takes place. We are all hooked to screens more and more in our lives, especially during this COVID time when we've been working from home and connected with our families through screen time. We've been worshiping in church with screen time. It's just multiplied enormously, but screen time can be a major factor. As I said above about psychotropic medications, there is a group of medications, risperidone, quetiapine, Seroquel, Zyprexa, olanzapine. These are all being prescribed with increasing frequency, and we're increasing 10 to 20% in those prescriptions per year. Normally, these medications are used to treat schizophrenia, but more and more they're being used to treat children with depression. And these medications cause obesity, type 2 diabetes, strokes in children, blood clots, and they have their share of problems. These medications do not cure depression. They just treat the symptoms and control them. And occasionally medications are necessary. I'm not anti-medication. But we must be aware that there are other modalities of treating depression other than medications. Vitamin D levels are very important. 100% of Canadians are vitamin D deficient. We don't get enough sunshine. Now, for some of you who were born and have spent part of your time closer to the equator than Ottawa, there's also an issue there too. We have found in India, for example, that Indians are also vitamin D deficient because skin melanin, skin pigmentation, decreases the absorption of vitamin D. Yes, it does protect you from the damaging effects of the sun largely, and when I'm in Africa, I am very jealous of my African family because they are much better protected from the sun than I am. But they also get vitamin D deficient. So vitamin D deficiency is a big thing, and we probably all need to be taking some vitamin D. Now, there is a bit of a question now as to what type of vitamin D we should take, and the common type in a drugstore is vitamin D3, calcipotriol. And I just read a study whereby the old-fashioned cod liver oil that my mother used to give me when I was a child was probably 10 times more efficient at boosting my vitamin D levels than a vitamin D tablet. I remember hating taking cod liver oil as a child. I do take vitamin D myself. I take 5,000 units every Sunday morning. I take it once a week because I have checked my levels and they have been somewhat low. So vitamin D is an important one, and it's one of the few supplements that I recommend. We also check your folic acid levels because folic acid is a vitamin that's required for brain functioning, and I always make sure that people are up to date on folic acid, and also B12. So let's look at the possible dietary causes here. So we have the excessive amounts of omega-6s. And we talked about that already in one other night, but some of you weren't here. Omega-6s are found in seeds and grains. Omega-3s are found in stalks, roots, and stems and leaves of plants. So our omega-3s get boosted if we're eating a very high plant-based diet, or if the cows are grass-fed that we eat or drink the milk of, instead of being grain-fed, which is the way most of them are. If the fish we buy are able to swim free in the ocean and eat what they normally eat, they have high omega-3s. But if they are grain-fed and farmed fish, they have high omega-6s. Normally, the ratio should be 2 to 1, 2 times the amount of omega-6 to omega-3. In Canada right now, we're running 15 to 20 times omega-6 to omega-3. So omega-3 supplementation is a very important part of this, and it is another supplement that I think is important for anyone who is struggling with brain function issues. And I recommend that they get an omega-3 and take one with every meal to boost their omega-3s. Now, there's some people who are vegan and they don't want to take fish oils, and they want to know whether flaxseed oil will help. Flaxseed oil is good, but it is not an omega-3. It has to be processed to be turned into an omega-3. So it's a supporter of omega-3, but it's a little bit of a circuit to get into omega-3. So fish oils, and it should be wild fish oils, are the best omega-3s. 99% of us are deficient in omega-3s. So we need to increase the healthy fats that we can get in food. So the healthy fats are going to come from plant-based sources, not animal sources. And they got to be less processed than highly processed. So the more processing that goes into the oil, the less beneficial it is to us. So if we're going to buy olive oil, we want the first pressing, the extra virgin of the olive oil, in which the olives are just crushed and there's no pressing, no refining that goes on. Sometimes there's a little bit of a trickiness with marketing on this, so you got to be a little bit careful. We can usually find extra virgin olive oil. Avocados are excellent, very expensive here in Canada with price rises. It's not always easily available. Nuts, a selection of different nuts, walnuts, almonds, pecans, Brazil nuts, pistachios, all of the different nuts. And Malachi was just asking me about peanuts. He said it was the only nut he could eat, but peanuts are not a nut, okay? They're a legume. They belong to the peas and beans in the family. They're not really a nut. So peanuts are groundnuts. So we need to increase our organic foods, especially those of plant origins. We want to avoid as much Roundup as we possibly can, and that's one of the reasons why we want to go organic as much as we can. And I think that it's helpful, as I'm driving back and forth here in the Ottawa area, I see that you got a lot of places where farmers bring and sell their produce on the side of the road and everything at this time of year. Those are always good, but you need to ask them what they do with spraying, okay? And whether they use Roundup, whether they use herbicides, whether they spray for insects, insecticides, and all that sort of thing. If we're not sure, make sure you wash your plants, your fruit, and wash off all the sprays that are on it. But the less toxins from sprays, the better. Decrease our use of processed foods. Should be whole, natural foods. Root out a lack of vitamin B1, thiamine. This is especially important for people who consume a fair amount of alcohol, because alcohol destroys thiamine. And so when people are trying to detox from alcoholism, I have to supplement thiamine as one of the aspects. People who are quitting smoking, I supplement thiamine for them too, because the nicotine has destroyed the thiamine in their bodies. Then we've got selenium. Selenium is found, it's very good for hair health. So for those of us guys where we're losing hair or we have poor quality hair, selenium supplementation is important. And the best source of selenium is a Brazil nut. If you had one Brazil nut a day, they're expensive, you don't want to eat many of them, but one Brazil nut a day provides you with your requirements for selenium. The other ones is seafood. I'm not a particular seafood fan, so I find Brazil nuts are my answer for that. The other thing that I found with the nuts that we supplement is my good cholesterol is frequently low, and I struggle to get my good cholesterol up there. And there are two things that will raise your good cholesterol. One is vigorous exercise, and the other is some nuts, and especially Brazil nuts, pistachios. So those will raise your good cholesterol. Then we have the other deficiencies I talked about: vitamin D, folic acid, homocysteine. 15% of our population is sensitive to gluten. Some are sensitive to dairy. Some are sensitive to soy. We look at these issues and see whether they need to try a diet without one of those. They're difficult. They require commitment. But food sensitivities play a role with depression. My wife is gluten sensitive. So if she eats bread or gluten of any sorts, she gets a variety of symptoms. The first thing is she gets an upset stomach. She's running to the toilet all the time. But second of all is she gets depressed. And she can use that depression as a sign of what she's eaten. Now, very interestingly, if we are in Europe, where they have outlawed GMOs, she can eat bread without a problem. But the moment we get back home, where all our wheat is GMO'd, she struggles. She struggles with depression with breads. We were over in St. Pierre and Miquelon off the coast of Newfoundland, which is a French territory, and we asked the fellow who was running the little B&B where we stayed, and he was serving croissants, and we love a good French croissant, but we said, "Where does your wheat come from?" He said, "I don't know. Maybe from Canada?" I said, "Well, just check and see where your wheat comes from." So he came back and says, "No, it comes from France." We said, "All right." My wife said, "We'll order some." A friend of mine who I work with in Egypt on a regular basis is very gluten sensitive as well. And we were, a couple years ago, at a wedding in Ukraine, and the family we were staying with, I saw she was eating wheat. She was eating bread. I said, I thought you were wheat sensitive. She said, "I haven't had no problem at all here in Ukraine." And the reason was the family raised their own wheat. There were no herbicides. There was no Roundup. It was organic. They ground their own flour and didn't have a problem. So part of our problem with wheat is coming from glyphosate and GMO'd organisms. Okay, we'll move on to our next slide. So the food we need whole foods. We need good quality, fresh food, organic if possible. And the variety is just endless. The foods that are rich in selenium, right here, the Brazil nuts in the center, right there, we have garlic, broccoli, onions, eggs have selenium in them, seafood has selenium in them, certain seeds and nuts have selenium, but your richest source of selenium is the Brazil nuts. So the super brain foods that we have are these. We have avocado, blueberries, profoundly rich in antioxidants, okay, especially wild ones. And fortunately in New Brunswick, we have lots of wild blueberries. The season's just gotten over. And we usually get as many as we can, either picking them ourselves or else getting them from some of our friends. But blueberries are excellent. Broccoli is excellent. Spinach, bananas, almonds, Brussels sprouts. Many of the cruciferous vegetables. And do you know what the cruciferous vegetables are? They're the cabbage, kale, Brussels sprouts, broccoli, I think kohlrabi. Are you familiar with kohlrabi? It's another cruciferous vegetables. These are very, very good for the brain as well. And an acquaintance of mine who was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis and was confined to a wheelchair, she was a physician and very, very incapacitated with MS. And she went on a curative diet, a detox diet of just 25 servings of cruciferous vegetables every day. And she did that for a month. And at the end of the month, she was out of the wheelchair, she was walking again, and she was seeing major improvement. The neurologist who saw her didn't believe that it was possible. He credited it to a few other things, but she has experimented with it herself, and as long as she keeps her cruciferous vegetables high, she's doing better with her MS. It hasn't cured it, but her symptoms are, and she's functional because of it. So there we got our collection of nuts. The grains, seeds, various seeds being chickpeas, pumpkin seeds, you name it, they're all very helpful. We have our herbs that are there, and a generous use of herbs and spices is very helpful for the brain too. And you can expand your 40 plant-based foods by adding some of these very easily. So a good diet will be very, very helpful in treating and helping with depression. So a couple of other ideas that we have for depression is, number one, don't plan to do everything that you would normally do. Unload your timetable a little bit if you're struggling with depression. Make a realistic timetable for yourself. I frequently say that depression makes mountains out of molehills. Things that are not really overly important become these overwhelmingly blocking things. And it takes things that are important and nobody pays any attention to them. So it makes mountains out of molehills, molehills out of mountains, because your perception gets distorted. One of the other things, before I go on, I'll just give another slide here, and that's olive oil. Extra virgin olive oil is another healthy oil. Here's some of your omega-3s, sources of omega-3s, walnuts, algae oil, flaxseed, tuna, although tuna has so much lead in it, or mercury in it right now, that it's not the healthiest food. Spinach, cod, the cod fishery is gone, Brussels sprouts, free-range eggs, those are all omega-3s. So, whole food diet, exercise regularly. We have shown that vigorous exercise is as good as medication in treating mild to moderate depression. So pick your exercise that you enjoy. If you've got arthritic knees, bicycle, swim, skate, whatever the exercise, get out there and be active, and it will help. Avoid sugar as much as possible, because sugars are an inflammation-causing problem, and they are not healthy for the brain. I told you the other night, I'll repeat it for those of you who weren't here, that the brain cells are the only cells in the body that do not require insulin to get sugar into them. High concentrations of sugars in cells destroy the cells. So the rest of the cells in the body have insulin that gets the sugar into the cell. And so when the blood sugar goes high, they shut down the insulin pump. They turn off the pump, so it doesn't pump it into the cells. We call that insulin resistance. And this is what gives us type 2 diabetes, because the sugar level increases. It's not getting into the cell. The insulin isn't pumping it in, but the sugar is getting into the brain, and it's destroying brain cells. So high quantities of sugar, very destructive to brain cells. That's why we're calling Alzheimer's disease type 3 diabetes. And we'll talk more about Alzheimer's disease before the week is out. I believe that's on Thursday night. Resistance training. So the first type of exercise is aerobic exercise. We get your heart rate up, but we also need to build muscles with resistance training. I was just at a family reunion in Sarnia a couple weeks ago, and a cousin of mine who was an athlete all his life told me, as he's struggling with back disease and hip problems and knee problems, So, I did too much weightlifting when I was young. He said, I've learned that the best thing to do is with elastic bands and to do some elastic band resistance training. And the physiotherapists are all recommending that we use elastic bands and stretch our muscles against that too. So weights are not always the best, but you can use small amounts of weights, and those are fine. Good quality sleep. There's nothing that restores the brain like good quality sleep. And there are certain ways to monitor the quality of sleep that you have. There are watches that will tell you how much deep quality sleep you have. If you get them, they monitor that. And because it's during our REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, this deep, deep sleep, that the brain heals. And if we are not getting REM sleep, then our brains cannot heal from these disorders that have broken them down. So quality sleep, crucial to recovering from any brain disorder, specifically depression. Relaxation techniques. And this is variable from a nice cup of tea and a good book to just quietly lying in the sunshine in the afternoon on a sunny September afternoon, to doing some meditation, to doing some deep breathing, to systematically relax all the muscles in your body. And we'll look at some of those when we're talking about anxiety in a couple of minutes. So relax your mind. Limit your screen time. And then the last one is stomp out the ants. And ants refer to automatic negative thoughts. So these are the thoughts that come into all of our brains on a regular basis. I should have done this. I never do this. I can never get this. I always do this. These are the things we tell ourselves about ourselves, and we need to stomp them out. So when we get these negative thoughts, we need to replace them with positive thoughts. And I tell people to keep a little notebook about positive things about yourself. The hardest time I had was one time when I was in a courtroom situation, and I was listening to some expert witnesses saying all sorts of horrible things about me, never met me in their life, but they were paid to do this, and it was very, very destructive. And so what I had to do was I had to write down on a piece of paper things that I knew were true, and the positive things about oneself. And you remind yourself of those. But avoid those words like I should have, I could have, I would have. I always say shoulda, woulda, coulda. Forget it, okay? I was in Guatemala 3 years ago, and I was in Chichicastenango, a very popular tourist town. And I did not do any of the security things that I normally do when I'm in a crowded market situation. I had my wallet in my pocket, I had my passport in my pocket, and needless to say, when I got back to the car, my wallet was gone. Well, I started saying, I shoulda, coulda, woulda, if I just would have done this. I didn't follow any of the normal instructions that I have. Normally, when I'm in those situations, I keep a small amount of money in my sock, and I don't take a wallet or anything with me because I know I'm going to come out without it. And another story was I was in Bujumbura, Burundi with my parents and everybody, and I took them to the market in Bujumbura, and I gave them all a lecture as to what they were to do so they wouldn't get robbed in the market. I didn't follow one of my own instructions, and the one that was robbed coming out of the market was me. So, and then I got all sorts of things that I tell myself, well, if I just would have. Now, don't even think about that, okay? I lost the wallet, cancel the credit cards, let's move on, okay? We just got to move on. So stomp on these ants, these automatic negative thoughts that plague all of us. Social supports, I said that. Put aside tasks that seem too difficult. During times of depression, avoid making big decisions which affect your life. Don't sell properties. Don't decide you're moving to Yukon. Don't make any big decisions, okay? Just deal with the day-to-day ones that you have to. Any questions about depression before we move on to anxiety? A couple of other slides here. Do something for someone else. That's another thing. Take the focus off yourself. Do something for someone else. Social supports, very important. We need to be connected. Any questions? Yes. Mm-hmm.
I wondered if having insomnia, not getting enough sleep at night, if it has anything to do with your immune system.
Yes, it does, absolutely. Because that sleep is absolutely required for our healing, for our immune system to be strengthened, for brain to be healed. And you go without sleep for a period of time, and your entire health starts falling apart, okay? And so insomnia is a terrible thing. When you lie there in bed and there's just no sleep possible, it's not an easy thing to treat. We go through the regular things. First thing, are you taking any caffeine over the course of the day? Because we got to eliminate caffeine. We got to eliminate all other stimulants. We then look at, are you exercising late in the evening? Because you should exercise in the morning, not before you go to bed. If I'm out mowing the lawn, and pushing the lawn more late at night, I'll come in and I'll be wired. It's like I've had 3 cups of coffee. There's no sleep for me. So I got to do that exercise early in the day, never after 4 o'clock. We look at not putting screens in our bedroom, so there should be no televisions in our bedroom. Don't take your cell phone into your bedroom. Leave your cell phone in another room, because it's invariably going to bing and ding and as messages come in, especially for me, because I got people in Congo that are sending me messages when they get up in the morning, but it's while I'm sound asleep. Doesn't go in the bedroom. No screens in the bedroom. Preferably no lights in the bedroom either. So we've got all these lights from clocks that are lit up and LEDs on a whole bunch of things. We need to sort of get rid of them, so we should have a darkened room. We sleep better if the temperature is cooler than if it's hot. So it's a problem this time of year. It's a nice warm day today. The evenings have not been cooling down yet. But if we can open the windows, let some fresh air come in and cool the bedroom down, we're better to sleep at 18 degrees than 22 degrees, which is room temperature. So my wife loves opening the windows up in the bedroom, and it's 40 below outside, and I'm just getting undressed and ready for bed, and I always complain about that. I say, if you want to cool the room down, do it a couple hours before, but cool the room down. So these are some of the sleep hygiene things that we need to do. But then if we still have problems with sleep, we need to correct it somehow, and we do occasionally use medication for it. The natural medications you can use to help you sleep are certainly melatonin, which is a hormone secreted by the pineal gland that helps you sleep. The other one is going to be valerian, which is an herbal product. Don't smell it, because you'll gag before you get it down. It smells like dirty socks, but valerian is helpful. Those are some of the natural things. But sleep is important. Yes?
I have a question on diet and brain health.
Sure.
Would you recommend taking a multivitamin?
The vitamins that I recommend are, for brain health, I recommend a vitamin B complex. And if anyone who is having any sort of a brain-related issue, I recommend one called B100. which is available in the pharmacy. And we frequently are low in our B vitamins in our diets. And so I do recommend B. I certainly recommend vitamin D, okay? Now, I think if you're eating healthfully, you don't need vitamin C, okay? The only time I would recommend vitamin C is if you start getting some sort of an upper respiratory infection, sore throat, a runny nose, then I recommend taking a vitamin C with zinc lozenge, but always with food on your stomach, because the zinc will make you quite nauseated if you don't. But vitamin C, we get enough of it in most things. If we're eating fresh food, we get enough. We probably get enough vitamin A, but my optometry people and ophthalmology people are recommending we supplement vitamin A as we get older to prevent macular degeneration in our eyes, to slow down cataract development. So vitamin A is important as we get older for eye health. So yes, there are vitamins that are worth taking. Yeah. Any others? Yes.
You mentioned different issues with women that contribute to depression.
Hormonal change.
Hormonal changes. You didn't talk about premenstrual dysphoric disorder.
Sure, and premenstrual dysphoria is a big issue too. So we got, and that was one I didn't mention, but puberty with starting of periods, hormonal change at that time, and that puberty affects both men and women with depression, okay? It's not just women. But then childbirth, premenstrual disorders, and menopause, all of those, yep. And it's something that women have got to be very in tune with as they go through these hormonal changes in their cycles and in their lives, because they play a very big role with mood. Yeah.
Okay. And the other thing I wanted to ask about, when you were talking about bread, I find that if I eat regular bread, whole wheat, 12 grain, whatever, I feel, I don't know if it's a brain fog or what, but I feel weird. But when I eat sourdough bread, I feel fine.
And sourdough bread, if you're going to eat bread, sourdough is the one to eat, because the sourdough process is just makes the bread so much more tolerable and so much more digestible. People who are wheat sensitive can frequently eat sourdough bread without any problem at all.
Oh,
okay. So we buy, it's not easy to find good quality sourdough bread, but we do buy it whenever we find it available. And if my wife, who is gluten sensitive, eats sourdough bread, she can get by with a few pieces without the gut disturbance and without the mood disturbance too. Yep, so sourdough is the best of that options, absolutely. Okay, I'm going to go on then here, and then we can get some more questions in a minute. But let's go on to anxiety. So generalized anxiety disorder, and I have a quotation from a Roman writer way back 2,000 years ago who said, "The pain of the soul weighs more than the suffering of the body." And describing anxiety. Anxiety is a reaction to something which frightens us and which we try to avoid. It can also occur as a result of intense emotions when we confront something that we're afraid of. It's part of the natural stress mechanism, which in the beginning helped us to survive. We discussed that Saturday night. And in contrast to the other psychological mechanisms, anxiety is really a part of us from the moment we're born. Okay? We all have it. So then, why do people develop an anxiety disorder when others don't? Each of us has a potential to develop an anxiety disorder. We all do. And I'll come shortly to listing a few of the anxiety disorders out. Yeah, it'll be just in a few minutes, but I'll go through them right now. We have phobias. I have a colleague, an emergency room doc, young fella, who deals with obsessive compulsive disorder. His life is in total ruination because of this obsessive compulsive disorder. He has to go through rituals. Everything is ritualized. He comes in the house. He takes off all his clothes at the door. They go in the washing machine before he takes 3 steps into the door. He's got to shower. He's got to wash. He's got, and during COVID, it was 10 times worse. So obsessive compulsive disorder, panic attacks, generalized anxiety disorders, even depression can be a type of an anxiety disorder. So besides this predisposition to these disorders, which each of us has, sometimes there's something that unlocks it and makes it become much bigger to the point where we can't function in our lives. And that can be a challenge to try and figure out what it is. Now, you're familiar with what we call PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, which is frequently comes when we are exposed to some emotional trauma. My uncle was in World War II in the infantry, and when he came back from Europe, he was never the same. And at that day and age, we didn't know what PTSD was. He, of course, was a member of the Royal Canadian Legion. He became an alcoholic. His life was one of physical abuse, chemical abuse, alcoholism. His children were badly abused. His wife was badly abused. And his life was ruined by PTSD. We now know, since we know what PTSD is, we see it in the military who return from military service. Being in a place where you're killing people and seeing bodies and your friends blown up beside you is not an easy situation. We should not be putting people in those situations. I have a patient who's an EMT. He was called one day for an accident way out on a snowmobile trail, way out in the woods. And he got out there, and this man is just mangled up. He's got a leg that's almost torn off. He's bleeding. And they had to do their first aid work out there in the woods, in the snow. They had to get him on a snowmobile, transport him to a road where they could get him in the ambulance. And because of that time framework, the patient died. He was a young man. And this EMT has not been able to get over it. It's just, he closes his eyes, he sees the young man, he goes through the woulda, shoulda, couldas, wondering what he should have done to have saved this man's life. It's to the point now where if he hears a siren in the city, he just curls up in a ball and just starts trembling because of PTSD. It's destroying his life. He can't work as an EMT anymore. His wife is also an EMT. And she cannot come home and tell him about anything that she's seen in work. So it's really destroying their ability to communicate about work-related things because of this emotional trauma. So there can be something that triggers a trait becoming a disease. Not always easy to figure out. And sometimes we have to go back in people's experiences, and we have a certain type of therapy that can be done whereby the therapist takes a person back in their memories to their earliest childhood memories and tries to figure out when these symptoms first occurred and what happened, and try to choose an alternative response to the one that has triggered these disorders. Very, very challenging to find out. But it's a reaction to something that changes it from a normal disorder to a disease disorder. Unhealthy anxiety can have a great impact on our lives. It can stop us from doing the things that we really want to do. It enslaves us to the mundane activities of life. If one is anxious, one may have the feeling that their life is totally controlled by the anxiety. They're just not free anymore. They're a prisoner to this disease. Even though we can find that what they're anxious about is not really reasonable, it doesn't help. I have a young friend of mine, patient of mine, who has a phobia of butterflies. And I've laughed at it, I will admit, because it sounds rather silly to me, because butterflies are beautiful. But, oh, I have seen her with a butterfly exposure absolutely go into a state where she cannot eat. Her heart is beating, her blood pressure is up, she's sweating. She just closes up just like into a ball, and she is that way for hours just after seeing a butterfly. I have no idea what caused that to happen. Something in her childhood. And one of these days, we're going to have to go and try and explore that. So we need to see if we can figure out what these are. But I can tell her, a butterfly's not going to hurt you. She says, I know that. I'm aware of that. But it doesn't change the situation. It's not reasonable. It's not logical. You may not feel that you can really even explain what it is that makes you anxious. I've heard people say, I've really got nothing to worry about. And when I have nothing to worry about, I worry that there's nothing to worry about. It becomes a snowball effect. And as most of us have noticed, there's sort of a vicious cycle that goes on with this. And these are some of the different parts of the body that are affected by anxiety. Cardiovascular problems up here, weakened respiratory system. We talked about getting asthma from stressful situations, overworked nervous system, problems falling asleep, changes in the brain. Those cause a weakened immune system. We have changes in our metabolism, digestive issues, greater susceptibility to stomach ulcers, and it becomes just a terrible cycle. But it is possible to break this cycle. We can learn to be the master of our anxiety, and we can recover the happiness that we've lost. So these disorders are much more common than what one might think. The anxiety becomes a problem when the worrisome situation disappears, when there's a disproportionate amount of distress, such as the butterfly issue, when it's not connected to any fear-causing event in life. In other words, there's no reason for it, the butterfly, when it constantly preoccupies the person, and when it stops the person from functioning in a normal way in society. So the symptoms, let me see if I got a few of them listed here. Underlying causes of anxiety. Sometimes we have gut infections and imbalances that play a role with it. We have thyroid inflammation, Hashimoto's thyroiditis, or thyroid dysfunction, which can be part of it. Adrenal fatigue with oversecretion of cortisol. Estrogen disturbances, and that's where we get perimenopausal PMS and estrogen-related areas. Autoimmune disorders, cardiovascular disease. And another one that's very interesting is mildew and toxic mold poisoning. Buildings that have been flooded, people live in these buildings, and it is very, very destructive to their mood and their ability to relate. Okay, so what can we do to control anxiety? First thing I suggest is that we get people to focus on their breathing. We just get them, when they get an anxiety spell, young man that I was telling you about, the student in Gatineau, I just informed him, I said, your panic disorder is not going to kill you. It's not a serious disorder. It's a distressing disorder, but not a serious disorder. When it comes, you stop what you're doing, you focus on your breathing, and you just slow down your breathing, because he breathes fast. He blows off carbon dioxide, which causes his blood to become alkalotic. And then before long, his fingers start to contract, and he goes into this tetany from the alkalosis. And it's because he's breathing too fast. So I said, no, you slow down your breathing. How long does your panic attack last? 30 seconds. Okay, You can handle it for 30 seconds. He said, but I'm just afraid that it's going to last for the rest of my life. I said, okay, so your fear of the panic attack is what prolongs it. Well, yes. Okay, panic attack is not going to destroy you. We're going to help you work through this. So focus on breathing. Abdominal respiration rather than chest respiration. Most of us breathe with our chest muscles, and if we start focusing with abdominal breathing, which if we take voice lessons and want to become a singer, we learn that we have to breathe with our abdomen, breathe with our abdominal muscles rather than our chest muscles. Count our breathing. Inhale slowly for 3 seconds, pause for 2 seconds, and then exhale for 5 seconds. And just slowing it down. So inhale, 1, 2, 3. Hold 1, 2 for 5 seconds. And if we get this rhythm going, it helps calm the anxiety down. Progressive muscular relaxation. That's where we just sit in a quiet place, a comfortable place, and then you go make a circuit around your body and you tighten the muscles. So you tighten your arm muscle, and then you let your arm muscle completely relax, your hand completely relax. And then you tighten your abdominal muscles on one side, and then you let them slowly relax. You do the same thing through one leg, thigh, leg, foot. You come up the other foot, leg, thigh, buttocks, chest muscles, neck muscles, head muscles, and then at the end you want to just take a big sighing breath and relax every muscle in your body. Very few of us know how to relax. When I take blood pressures, I tell somebody, relax. They're sitting like, no, relax. I am relaxed. No, you're not. Do you know how to relax? Well, I guess not. No wonder your blood pressure's up there, okay? So we need to practice it and learn how to relax. And so this muscle relaxation is helpful. Mindfulness. And by mindfulness, we focus in on something in the present. So in some of the exercises that I've done in class, we take a grape, and the instructor will say, be mindful of the grape, what its color is, feel its texture, smell it, savor the vine that it grows on. Finally, taste the grape, and just focus your whole mind on the grape or something else. And so with a meditative process, we can take, I frequently will tell people, breathe something in and release the tension. So you breathe in relaxation, you breathe out tension. Breathe in love and breathe out hatred. Breathe in peace and breathe out turmoil. And spend a little bit of time thinking about breathing in these positive and letting the negative ones go out. Breathe in calmness and breathe out anxiety. And you just work at relaxing the whole person. Another relaxation technique is to close your mind and pick some spot that's very special to you in your mind. Some place that you remember, some great memory when you were a child, and you just go to that place. And you think about the sights, the smells, the sounds, the whole experience of what it was like at that calming, quiet place in your mind. And that will help dispel some of this anxiety too. Attentions to the life rhythms, so sleep, nutrition, we've talked about that. I told you we were going to try some laughter therapy tonight, so we got to try it, okay? So we're going to give it a try. You ready? So what I want you to do with laughter therapy is you just got to start laughing, okay? You want to make yourself laugh, okay? So I'm going to give you a count of 5, and we're all going to start laughing, okay? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's start. Everybody. How do you feel? Relaxed? It helps, okay? So a good laugh is just really, really relaxing. And so when you get stressed, it's hard to laugh, but sometimes you have to force it. When you do, do that for a couple minutes and it helps. We have aromatherapy. I have a massage therapist who always has a little aroma, a little one of these, I don't know what you call them, a little misting thing that has some very, very pleasant essential oils in it. Very, very helpful. Essential oils are helpful for relaxation. We have art therapy. My daughter tried to get my wife to do art, and my wife said, it makes me so angry I could just tear the paper up. I'm not an artist at all. And my daughter said, okay, well then forget it, don't do it then. Okay, I thought it might help. But art for people who enjoy art. And find something that you enjoy that you can focus in on to help you. Yes? Uh-huh. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. Mm-hmm. Is the Buddhist idea, yeah? Mm-hmm. Buddhism in it. No, it's... Mm-hmm. Sure, and that will work for some people. For me, I get my newspaper in the morning, and when I get a few minutes after a busy day in the office, I sit down and do the Sudoku. And that helps me relax. And now my wife would never do a Sudoku. She gets so mad and frustrated with it too that it makes her anxiety worse. But find something that you can do in the course of a day that helps relieve some of that anxiety. And they will all be very helpful. Randy, who some of you met on the weekend, who was here, and I'm going to get him on this coming weekend to give you a little personal testimony of his journey through depression. But he has launched a program here in Ottawa called Art for Mental Health. And when Parliament Hill is open, he usually has a session right on Parliament Hill in front of the Parliament buildings, center block. And they have a variety of artists from the whole city. And they come and they draw and they focus in on mental health. And so he has tried to do this as a way of raising awareness for mental health issues. And also these artists have given help to people, so they've been doing art therapy. So these are some things that help. Okay, there are false friends with depression, and they are 3 that I can think of right off the bat: alcohol, tobacco, and cannabis. All of them tend to increase anxiety rather than decrease it, okay? So, yep. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I've heard that using the leaves to make tea, folks find that helpful for different types of illness, asthma and whatnot.
Well,
What do you have to say to
patients
that?
come in and ask me about it. And initially, when it was available medically, before it was available legally for recreational use, patients would always come and ask me. And my reply to them was, according to what I read online and what patients tell me, I should be totally unemployed with the availability of cannabis. It cures every disease known to mankind. So I'm not so sure that it does, because I'm still occupied and still working and still busy. I think there is some benefit for pain relief with it, and I will admit that if my cancer patients find that cannabis is giving them pain relief rather than Dilaudid and morphine and all the other opioids, which are not good either, but for cancer patients, I do support its use. If you make a tea with the leaves, it would depend on the variety that you're using, because there are various levels of THC. It's the THC, the chemical in there. Now, CBD oil does not have THC. It does not have the psychoactive component in it. And it can be used, I think, more safely than anything with THC in it. The other little comparative story I can tell you is when you fly into Cuzco, Peru at 4,000 meters elevation and you get soroche, the altitude sickness, and we all do when we fly into Cuzco, the Peruvians, the Incas, serve you coca tea, which is coca leaves, and they say that helps. And the concentration of cocaine in coca leaves is very, very limited, because it has to be concentrated and purified and everything to be done. And so it's a widespread use, legitimate legal use in Cuzco for people who fly in from Lima at sea level, and to help them with their acute mountain or elevation sickness. So I don't know. I'd have to find out about the tea of a cannabis leaf and see what it does. When I first started working with the Pygmies one day, as I was just learning about their lifestyle, I saw a cannabis plant growing with the Pygmies. And I said, "What's that doing here?" And the person who was with me said, "Ask them." I said, "Okay. What do you use this plant for?" And they said, "Well, food is very difficult to find, and most of us eat only 2 times a week. And our children are frequently hungry, and they cry nonstop and can't go to sleep. And when that happens, we make a tea from these leaves, and we give it to our children so they can go to sleep." That was one of the shocking revelations that I had when I started working with them. The other shocking revelation, and I'll show you the picture of the lady on Saturday afternoon, but she got up and she said to me, "I have never, ever been comfortable for 1 minute in my entire life." And she described how in these simple little mud huts with banana leaf roofs, when it rains, that they have to stand up all night, huddled together because the water just flows through their houses. They're cold. I thought, if I am uncomfortable for 1 minute, I think the end of the world has come. And here this lady says, "I have never been comfortable for 1 minute in my entire life." So that's what spawned our project, working with them. And I'll tell you more about that Saturday afternoon. Okay. So there are a variety of things that we use for treating this, some of the things that I listed. And not everyone works for every person, but if we can put a combination of these in and individualize it for some people, then it works better. Let's go on to part 2 of our program today. And it's called The Battle Between Love and Fear. And we've been talking about those two and for the second parts of our programs. And so what I want to mention to you today is that I frequently describe that there are 2 kingdoms that are at war with each other. We have the kingdom of heaven, and we have the kingdom of this earth. And the kingdom of heaven is based on love, and the kingdom of this earth is based on fear. And so we have two parts of the brain that are struggling and at war with each other for control. We have the prefrontal cortex, where reason, critical thinking, worship, conscience, a sense of altruism and helping others is located. And then we have the amygdala, which is the fear center of our brain. And one of those will be in control for all of us. We all have one or the other. And so there's a constant struggle between these two aspects of our brain. I have a particular, I have a fellowship in wilderness medicine, and I'm frequently in wilderness medicine dealing with survival situations. And I have a deep interest in survival. What happens? Why do some people survive and other people don't survive when a terrible trouble comes, okay? A boat goes down in the middle of the Atlantic, and some survive, some don't. An airplane crashes. Everyone's alive when it hits the ground. They're in the middle of the forest somewhere. Some survive, some don't. What's the difference? And we find out that within survival, say you're on a snowmobile trek in the middle of the winter, and you're on the Ottawa River here, and the ice breaks through, and you head into the Ottawa River, okay, and you're freezing cold. The water is 0 degrees, and there you are in the river, in the ice. What happens? Well, the first thing that happens is your amygdala kicks in because it's a stressful situation. And so the fear, I'm going to drown, I'm going to freeze to death, I'm going to have hypothermia, and you take this big deep breath from the cold, and then your muscles get paralyzed, and you can't move, and you can't do anything. But what we have found is if you are able to override your amygdala and think clearly, you will be the survivor. And if you let your amygdala control you, you will not survive. So critical thinking, this critical thinking component is very, very important. And there is a war that goes on in the mind between these two factors. And in the Bible, in Scripture, it describes this war that goes on between these two factors, and it describes what takes place with it. So the prefrontal cortex is dominant. If it's dominant, we have other-centered love, trust, altruism, peace, freedom, service for others, especially the most vulnerable and forgotten of our society. If the amygdala is dominant, then we have fear, self-centeredness, love of self, control of others, and survival of oneself, which directs our actions. The brain is wired so that either one or the other is in control. There's always a battle between the two the two centers, and only one will dominate. We've seen how some of our choices affect one or the other. The food we eat affects it. The amount of sleep we have, the amount of exercise we have, toxins, sugar, stress, the entertainment we watch, all plays a role with this. So the Bible tells us about these two systems, the kingdom of heaven and the kingdom of the prince of this earth. And so we have a list in Galatians 5:22 of the characteristics of those who let their prefrontal cortex be in control and who are led and filled with this spirit of other-centeredness. And these are the results: patience, kindness, joy, love, faithfulness, peace, self-control, goodness. These are the parts that are there. However, in contrast to this, in the book of Romans, it describes what happens if the amygdala is under control. And it says, and they are filled with all kinds of wickedness, evil, greed, vice, jealousy, murder, deceit, malice. They gossip, speak evil of one another. They're hateful to God, insolent, proud, boastful. They think of more ways to do evil. They disobey their parents. They have no conscience. They don't keep their promises. They show no kindness or pity for others. They know what God's law says, but they continue doing these things and even approve of others who do them. Total difference. One way leads to health, the other way leads to disease, illness, and death. Two centers of control. We do have the choice which one we're going to strengthen and develop. And it's not a question of whether we're religious or not. Because, believe it or not, it's often very religious people who instill the most fear and the most control and cause the most problems. Religion is often a source of force. It's a source of oppression, control, greed, selfishness. I think of ISIS. Look what they did, when they were in reign in northern Syria and Iraq. I usually, since we don't have cable television at our house, when some of the big sports games come on, I go over to a friend's place and we watch the Grey Cup game and the Super Bowl game with them, and it's a social time for us. And one particular Grey Cup game, this fella's, who is now passed away, he was in his 90s, his son-in-law was there. And the conversation got going about an upcoming trip to Egypt. And he said, "Aren't you afraid to go to Egypt?" And I said, "No, I'm not afraid to go to Egypt." He said, "Well, you got ISIS and everything there." And I gave him a couple of examples of how I've had Muslims come up to me and say, "Are you a Christian?" And I'd say, "Yes." And they'd say, "Well, I'm Muslim, but we're really brothers." And I said, "That's right, we are. We're brothers and we need to learn to get along with each other." Oh, this son-in-law just took into me and he started screaming and hollering and, "You are not brothers," and this, and the Coptics in Egypt aren't even Christians, and only my perspective is the one that fits, and everyone else is condemned to this and that. And he ranted and raved for a full hour till I was missing the second half of the Grey Cup game. His wife left and went upstairs. The in-laws disappeared. My wife disappeared. I tried not to react to it, but it was awful. And when I left, I said to my wife, this Christian fundamentalism is just as toxic as what's going on in Iraq with ISIS. Okay? It's not leading to peace and harmony and joy and love. It's leading to division and hatred and anxiety. I said, just listening to it makes me feel horrible. Unfortunately, sometimes religion can be this way. Jesus told the story about this too. And you remember the story about the man going down to Jericho and being attacked by robbers, and how religious leaders came by and didn't even want to look at him because it would contaminate their religious principles. And they walked on the other side and they went by. And then it came a non-religious person, a despised person. If I'm in Congo, I say it was a pygmy who came by. If it was Jesus said it was a Samaritan who came by. And he showed compassion. And this shows that sometimes we who are religious can be the most intolerant of all. And unfortunately, sometimes churches are the most intolerant places we have. That needs to change. So it has nothing to do with being religious. It has to do with a choice. And that choice, which part of the brain will be in control? The Bible describes this choice as being so transformational that it's like being born again, starting over anew, a paradigm shift. Just a totally different perspective. Now, are you familiar with what a paradigm shift is? I'll tell you a little story to describe a paradigm shift. There was a man who got on the subway in Toronto early one morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, and he was still kind of groggy and sleepy. He hadn't had his cup of coffee yet for the day, and he just sort of wanted to chill out and relax while he went across Toronto with the subway. And at the next stop, a man got on board with 2 children, and they were just wild, animals. They were running and jumping and climbing up the poles on the metro and screaming and hollering and fighting with each other. And this man just got so overwhelmed, he was ready to take and just strangle these kids. Why doesn't this father do something with them? Why is he letting them do this? And the more they did it, the more angry he got. Finally, he couldn't stop it anymore, and he looked at the man and he said, "Why don't you stop your kids from doing this?" And the man looked up and said, "Oh, I'm sorry. I hadn't noticed. You see, we're just coming from the hospital, and their mother has just passed away. And we don't know exactly how to deal with this." Suddenly, this man had a paradigm shift. Instead of wanting to strangle these kids, he wanted to go and put his arms around them and embrace them and give them support and care. That's the transformation. That's the paradigm shift that needs to take place. And the Bible describes this as a new life completely. And you can imagine someone who is been controlled by their limbic system so intently their whole life that it's just been one of turmoil and fear and depression and anxiety, and that life isn't worth living. And suddenly that transformation can take place so they can be connected, valued, cherished. I think of the woman who was caught in adultery. The people brought her in front of Jesus, and they were ready to stone her, and they were ready to stone him, and they tried to see whether he was going to support their laws and their rules and regulations, which said she needed to be stoned, even though they said they had caught her in the act, and theoretically it was the man that should have been stoned, not the woman. But anyhow, besides the point. And what does Jesus do to this woman? He says, "Okay, let the one who's without any sin at all be the one that casts the first stone." And then he writes down some things, and maybe it was revealing some of the sins of her accusers. We don't know what it was that he wrote on the ground. That they all disappeared one by one. And he took this lady and restored her dignity, restored her self-esteem, and was transformational. She was a different person from that moment on. She no longer was totally controlled by her amygdala. She was able to let her prefrontal cortex take control. The universe, as we talked about yesterday, is created with a design law. That in order to survive in this universe, we need love, connectedness, trust. It's the circle of life. But there's another operating system that is frequently in operation. And unfortunately, and I don't want to step on anyone's political leanings, but unfortunately, we watched this take place in our neighbor to the south in the past 10 years, where suddenly it became okay to call people names and hit people when they were down and treat people like dirt and demand loyalty, and if you didn't get it, you stepped on them and crushed them to the ground. And have you noticed how hatred has expanded in the world since that started to take place? It's become legitimate. It's okay to do it now, where people would hide it before. So this is a war. It's a war for the mind. And so we need to decide which of these two kingdoms we're going to agree with, which ones we're going to accept. And in Romans 1:25, it says that people have exchanged the truth about God for a lie. They worship and serve what God has created instead of the Creator himself, who is to be praised forever. And the God that they worship that has been created is frequently themselves. And they become self-focused. So the Creator has explained how the universe is to function. And And he's shown us the design law that the universe is based on. Jesus came to demonstrate the law of love and trust, that the prefrontal cortex needs to be in control. Then he told us in Matthew 25, he tells a story. And we all know the story, but I want you to analyze what it says. When the Son of Man comes as a king and all the angels with him, he will sit on his royal throne, and all the people of all the nations will be gathered before him. And he'll divide them into two groups. Remember, we've been talking about two locuses of control. Just as a shepherd separates his sheep from his goats. But one group of people on the right, one group of people on the left. And the king will say to the people on the right, "Come, you that are blessed by my Father, come and possess the kingdom which has been prepared for you since the creation of the world. I was hungry, and you fed me. I was thirsty, and you gave me a drink. I was a stranger, and you received me into your homes. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me." The righteous will then answer him, "When did we ever see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you a drink? When did we ever see you as a stranger and welcome you into our homes, or naked and clothe you? When did we ever see you sick or in prison and visit you?" The king will reply, "I tell you that whenever you did it for one of the least important of these followers of mine, you've done it for me." And then he will say to those on the left, "Away from me, you that are under God's curse. I was hungry, and you would not feed me, thirsty, and you would not give me a drink. I was a stranger, and you would not welcome me into your homes, naked, and you would not clothe me. I was sick and in prison, but you wouldn't take care of me." And they will answer him, "Lord, when did we ever see you hungry, thirsty, or stranger, naked, or sick, or in prison, and would not help you?" The king will reply, "I tell you, whenever you refuse to help one of the least important ones of mine, you refuse to help me." And the results are one goes on to life, and the other goes on to non-life. You see, it's involving service, other-centered love and service for others, based on the prefrontal cortex, based on trust, based on admiration, based on love. So Jesus came to show us the realities of the universe, how he created it, and the laws upon which it's designed. Look at his life. It was a life of service for others, especially those who were in need, the sick, the suffering, the lepers, the women who were abused beyond belief in his society, the blind, the cripples, the prostitutes, the tax collectors, the Romans, the foreigners, the Samaritans. No person was outside of his attention. And then he gives his famous statement that I think summarizes this whole battle between these two parts of the brain. If one of you wants to be great, he must be the servant of the rest. If one of you wants to be first, he must be your slave, like the Son of Man, who did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life to help and redeem many people. Know the way in which he died. In spite of all his suffering, his attention was completely focused on others. Mother, take care of John. John, take care of Mother. Thief who was beside him, I will remember you. He was not focused on his own suffering. Our Creator is a God of love, and the universe was created with a design law that we take care of each other. Other-centered love. Fueled by other-centered love and an intimate relationship with our Creator, based on complete trust, our universe will continue to thrive and exist. The circle's broken. Deterioration begins. The universe becomes unbalanced, and if the break is not repaired, there is no healing. The universe will cease to exist. In our country, if we cannot recognize this and start taking care of others, if we only start taking care of ourselves, our country will fall apart. The difference between these operating systems is big. And so I challenge each of you that if you want to have a healthy brain, if you want to have a healthy, happy, fulfilled life, you need to find a way have someone help you find a way to balance these two centers out. Because this battle is being fought in each of our minds. And sometimes it's late at night, it's 10 o'clock at night, the phone rings, and someone's in distress. I've had a busy day, I'm tired, I'm ready for bed. And the battle begins. Do I answer this call and take care of it? And take care of someone in need? Or do I focus on myself? Not always easy. So I encourage each one of you to keep your focus outward. Service for people, service for those who are in need, and your life will be transformed. Thank you for listening. Yes.
When someone is overcome with suicidal ideation, does that mean that the amygdala has taken over?
Totally over controlled, yeah.
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 Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. When you were talking,
It totally takes control, and it totally blocks out everything from the prefrontal cortex.
Okay.
And then, and people get, people say, well, what do I do? That's where I am. How do I get out of this? And we have to start by strengthening step by step, bit by bit, our decision-making capacity in our prefrontal cortex. And we need to build connectedness somehow, somewhere, with somebody. You know that song, I think it should be one of our theme songs, that it said, he's not heavy, he's my brother, okay? When you're down and when you're in need, I'll be there. I'll carry you through, because someday I might be down and I might need somebody to carry me through. So we start by being support. There are times when I thought that I need to actually live somebody's life for them because they don't know how to get out of it. And you just need to take control and just start making decisions with them, for them, to help them break free from this prison, because it is a prison.
When depression and anxiety, as well, when that takes over, instead of seeking help, folks
we pull away.
Yeah,
and we will
isolate.
we'll pull away. We'll not only pull away, but we'll purposely damage relationships so that they do pull away from us.
Yeah.
Then it's not our fault. It's their fault for doing it. Okay? Yeah. So we do that. It's typical. Yeah.
Yeah. And I just want to share one more thing. When you talked about sharing their story, and that Randy's going to share his story.
You've got a story to share too, and we need to have that time.
I just want to share just one quick thing.
Sure.
Because everybody's heard my story already. What's helped me most recently, and I just want to share this with folks, is peer support.
Oh, absolutely. But that's connectedness.
Peer support, it makes all the difference. Finding a group where you can, where other people get it, right?
Where there's no condemnation or judgment.
Exactly.
Okay?
And in the church, that's where you get, and that's where I've experienced.
That's where we should get it.
It's like a shunning.
But it's a shunning that takes place, obviously.
Yes.
So, my brother-in-law, who has gone through addictions, finds his peer support group with Alcoholics Anonymous. You walk into Alcoholics Anonymous and they say, hello, my name's Bob and I'm an alcoholic. And immediately that judgment is taken down because they've admitted that. What would a church be like if we walked into church every day and said, hello, my name's Barry and I'm a terrible sinner. I am a broken person.
Yeah.
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 And if we were just willing to admit that And then we could be supportive to each other with some of these
Yeah.
things.
And I've
Yeah.
seen changes, drastic changes in individuals where they, they come, they get the peer support, and then they go out, they get jobs, and, and yeah, it's
And
remarkable.
so we need to all be those supportive people. Yeah. Okay, well, you all have a very good evening. And tomorrow night we're going to talk about, I believe it's ADD, ADHD, and autism, okay? Some disorders that are affecting your children today. We're going to look at those disorders tomorrow. I believe that's what it is. Isn't it on the list? I haven't looked at the list. What is it? Oh, dementia tomorrow. Okay, that's tomorrow. So it's going to be dementia and Alzheimer's disease tomorrow. Did you know that in 1901, Dr. Alzheimer first described this disease? 1901. And in 120 years, it's taken over our whole society. I had a pharmaceutical rep who told me, well, we didn't diagnose it before, but in all the research of history as far back as we can go, old age has never been a time of dementia. It's been a time of physical weakness, but mental sharpness. And when I go into Africa, I find that the seniors, the elders in Africa, are with it, competent, advising, capable people mentally, even though they're walking with a cane and they're physically deteriorated, but they're mentally strong. Why is it the other way in our society? We're going to talk about that tomorrow night. Okay? Have a good night. God bless, and have a wonderful evening.
Just to let everyone know, there's water and juice out here, so please help yourself. Thank you.